Buckingham Palace, yes, we're going to talk about that, held a peace summit between royal race rowers, Lady Susan Hussey and sister space charity boss Ngozi Fulani over the weekend. There, Lady Hussey apologized for the racist act, the allegedly racist act, of simply asking Fulani where she was, quote, really from. Well, now it seems Prince Harry and Meghan, race rowers themselves, are jealous. They apparently want their own peace summit with the palace ahead of King Charles's coronation in May. But do they deserve one? Well, you can guess what I think, but here to help us find out is TalkTV's royal editor, Sarah Hewson. Sarah Hewson, welcome so much to Inside the News. And first of all, the so-called documentary. Do you believe that love will win for this couple, as Meghan puts it?
Well, it's interesting, James, isn't it? Meghan talked about the Oprah interview and how she hoped it would give them truth and peace, but admitted it hasn't yet given them peace. And so we've had this 6-part Netflix documentary series, and we've got the book to come. It doesn't feel very peaceful, certainly on this side of the Atlantic. Harry and Meghan wanting to have a meeting with the royal family, as you described, wanting to have a royal summit and to get an apology out of the royal family, whereas sources close to the royal family suggesting that it should be Harry that makes the first move towards reconciliation. And given in that documentary series, Harry detailed the private conversations that took place between himself, his father, his brother, and his grandmother, talking about Prince William shouting and screaming at him and his father telling lies during that Sandringham summit, I think there's a distinct lack of trust. And the idea of a meeting going ahead at this point seems very, very distant indeed.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. I mean, it doesn't sound likely that they're going to consider that sort of sit down after what they said. But the other thing, that really struck me is an awful lot of people I spoke to said two things when they heard about this. They said, number one, it's really terrible to air the dirty laundry of the family like that. But number two, they said, families have disagreements. And this one, to a lot of them, felt like, the idea that the older brother is yelling, well, maybe so, but then the idea that this would all be happening in front of Her late Majesty the Queen, seemed fairly far-fetched. I mean, is this feeding into a credibility problem for them?
But I think that the takeaway for me was one of real sadness. These two brothers who had been through so much together and had such a unique and close bond could not be further apart. And we're told that William isn't taking calls from Harry at the moment. There's no contact. We saw during the documentary when William's text came through to Harry's phone after the Oprah interview, and the reaction from Meghan was, wow. We don't know the content of that message, but we can only imagine. I also think that there are questions over Prince Harry's depiction of the Queen's behaviour during that Sandringham summit. He suggested that she sat back and just took it all in, and that she had to act on the advice of her advisors. I think that underestimates the power and the will of the Queen. She was very resolute in her decisions once she made them. This was a woman who has been through so much and seen so much. Although this will have made her very sad, it won't have shocked her. And she will have been very clear on what she wanted to do. And our understanding is that it was the Queen ultimately who made that decision, that Harry and Meghan couldn't have this half-in, half-out kind of model that they were proposing. And it was her that said, you're either in or you're out. And ultimately, that meant they were out.
Yeah, and I mean, that sort of idea of being out, though, now they're leveraging this and basically treating themselves as, these sort of fantastic victims, and all these terrible things have happened to them. So the question is then, you've got these calls to strip the couple of their titles from some MPs. One of Harry's fellow veterans has slammed what's been going on. But, would they care? Or if all of that happened, would they just say, oh, well, these are just haters who are part of, an illusion, as her meditation coach would argue?
Well, interestingly, in the documentary, we learned for the first time that actually they had proposed that if it didn't work out for them in Canada with this half-in, half-out model they proposed, then they would hand back their Sussex titles. We had always believed that the Sussex titles were a core part of the brand. Yes, James, you're right, there are calls now from some MPs for them to be stripped of those titles. But the royal family, I see that as an escalation and an unnecessary one. Their plan is to ride this out quietly in dignified silence and hope that once the book is out, that there's nothing more for this couple to say. What has happened so far is very sad, as you talk about it, airing dirty laundry in public, but it hasn't fundamentally damaged the institution of monarchy in the way some fear. Of course, we've still got the book Spare out on January the 10th, so we'll have to wait and see what is in that. But at the moment, I don't think there's any need for any urgent action from the palace.
And very, very quickly, yes or no, they say that the Duchess, that there have been lines being fed, negative lines about the Duchess from the palace. Have you heard this actually happened? Has this happened to you just very quickly?
No, it hasn't happened to me, but I don't necessarily think her treatment in the press was altogether fair.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, royal reporter Sarah Hewson. It's been a great pleasure having you here on Inside the News with me tonight.